fed up of what just sounds like empty words and platitudes?
I think there's a mistake in the thinking that says if somebody offers prayers for San Bernardino or they're calling for people to pray for the victims, that's somehow different or mutually exclusive from taking political action. The prayer itself can be a form of political action. There's a long history in the United States of civil rights advocacy, for example, that's deeply rooted in religious institutions and organizations. I do think it's a form of shaming. It's a mass condemnation of people who express themselves through prayer at a time of tragedy.
All right, Emma Green from theatlantic.com in Washington, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We've got a lot more coverage on the rampage in California.
We'll show you why some say the massacre does not fit the pattern of other recent mass shootings. We're back in 90 seconds.
The president has called the shooting in California part of a pattern.
But in some ways, the tragedy does not fit. Professor of Law and Policy Studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and a former New York City police officer, Eugene O'Donnell, joined CBS this morning earlier with more on how investigators are searching for a motive.
It's easier today than it used to be because people leave trails. They leave text trails and emails, not always, but often, social media, and then you try to figure out who he's networked with. Tremendous interest, of course, in the wife, having come into the country apparently from Saudi Arabia, any travels they took, and it will be very painstaking, and it's got to be evidence-based. And what we want to know right now, the likelihood is things that come out now will turn out to be erroneous. So they need to stay focused and stay on the facts, stay on the evidence.
Facts are they were very organized.
Facts are they're very organized. Facts are they were able to use these weapons in a scary kind of way, and they maximized the taking of life. They didn't say anything. They just shot and slaughtered these poor folks.
And what stands out to you, Eugene, about this particular shooting and the way it was carried out and by who?
I mean, it's definitely an outlier as far as mass shootings. You've got two people. You've got a woman involved. And
how unusual is having a woman?
Very unusual. The FBI's done a study, and only a handful, a very small number of shooters have been women, so that's very unusual.
Are the women normally tied to the men associated with the attack?
Well, I think, again, we want to resist stereotypes, which are all too easy to fall into. Certainly as a criminal justice matter, and this may not be a criminal justice matter, this may be something beyond criminal justice, but it's often a man who is, leads to the downfall of the woman. The bad actor tends to be the man more than the woman usually.
And what about the fact that they took their daughter to the mother?
Yeah, so we're gonna have to see again, and we should be prepared to take this wherever it takes it. In the meantime, we shouldn't jump to conclusions, and also shouldn't use this to divide up the country. We should wait and see. But clearly, this may be just a guy whose life is unraveling, and for him, this is an honor killing. It's a way for him to, and he's wrapping himself up in maybe some radicalization to get some sort of.
But wouldn't we
credit.
know that from some kind of obvious signs in terms of people at work and elsewhere?
No, I think it's
You're
actually
unraveling.
It's maybe unraveling, but it is kind of well documented that some of the people, assuming this is some sort of terrorist attack, that these people have been able to stay below the surface. They're not known. The 9/11 attackers certainly were able to have what appeared to be normal lives, and they're almost separate personalities. They're separate, discrete people, and typically you'll hear people say, we had no notice, no warning whatsoever about this person.
Which is exactly what his brother-in-law said. He talked to him, he said about a week ago, his coworkers describe him as polite and reserved, that people had no idea. What do you think about what police should be focusing on right now, law enforcement?
Would you say this is a wake-up call?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely a wake-up call. And we got to get politics out of this. This is to be a non-ideological approach, a practical approach that respects people's rights. But one of the issues that came up last year, that there were some cheap shots taken at the police about so-called militarization. We see now that the police are in a different environment. It was a relatively small department, 46-officer department, front and center there. The Colton Police SWAT team played a major role here. So no doubt there's some excess with police militarization, but we have to be realistic about the threat environment we're in this country.
We're back after a quick break. We are still following our top story. As we heard from our team of correspondents in California, it's still a very active scene in San Bernardino.
We're hearing more about the victims as investigators continue to search for their motives. That's next. We'll be right back. You're watching CBSN.
CBSN, the live digital news network from CBS News.
Weather warnings are in effect up and down the eastern seaboard.
Watch live anywhere, anytime.
We're following a few big stories for you today.
Catch up on what you missed, view related stories, and share them.
We are following big news from Capitol Hill.
Happening now, we have some breaking news for you.
CBSN is on right now, on any computer, on the CBS News mobile app, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Fire TV. CBSN, CBS News, always on.
And hello, everyone. I'm Don Daler. Thank you for joining us. Investigators are working to uncover the motive behind yesterday's attack in San Bernardino, California. They're focusing their attention on the suspects, Syed Farook, seen here, and his wife, Tashfeen Malik. As of now, the possible theories for the attack range from workplace violence to terrorism. The scene inside the building was chaotic as people tried to escape during the shooting. 14 were killed and 17 were wounded in that assault. Police say the couple targeted a conference room where the county's public health department was hosting a party. We've learned Farook worked in that department as an inspector and had left the party before returning to kill. He and his wife had fled the scene in an SUV where they were killed in a dramatic police shootout on the streets of Redlands, a nearby town where the two lived. Today, President Obama, said this could be an act of terrorism.
It is possible that this was terrorist related, but we don't know. It's also possible that this was workplace related. And until the FBI has been able to conduct what are going to be a large number of interviews, until we understand the nature of the workplace relationship between the individual and his superiors, because he worked with the organization where this terrible shooting took place, until all the social media and electronic information has been exploited, we're just not going to be able to answer those questions. But what I can assure the American people is we're going to get to the bottom of this.
Now, Congressman Pete Aguilar is the representative for California's 31st Congressional District, which includes San Bernardino. Thank you so much for joining us. I know this is a very painful time for you. And I'll just say on behalf of all of us here that our thoughts are going out to all the victims and the family members out there you represent. You've been getting regular updates, I know, from law enforcement, the FBI. What do you know now about these suspects?
Well, law enforcement will do a briefing here shortly, and they can expand on what they've learned since the last briefing. What's important to know now is exactly what you mentioned, which is, we're still, praying and thinking of these families who have been affected. This is a great community, a community that I've been in for 4 generations, and to see this mass shooting take place has just been incredibly difficult. But our response, the law enforcement response, was incredible. And these brave men and women put their lives on the line to ensure the safety of others.
Unfortunately, San Bernardino is being mentioned in the same breath as the words Sandy Hook now, as being one of the gravest mass shootings in recent history. How's the community handling this?
Well, it's definitely not a list that we want to be on, and that's why we continue to be thankful for all the prayers and support that we've received. The community is looking to move past this. I mean, this is something that we are still dealing with, but people are shaken without a doubt, and we're going to see that for some time now. But it's important that we know that law enforcement officials are working every possible lead to ensure the continued safety of our communities. But as a father, I had to hug my kids a little tighter this morning and last evening. And I think that's what we would expect out of the community.
I completely understand that. We've been finding out little bits of information about the suspects from our law enforcement sources. Syed Farook traveled to Saudi Arabia in July 2014 to pick up his fiancée. He was there in Saudi Arabia for about 2 weeks. He's been described as a devout Muslim. Do you have any reason to believe that he had been radicalized during that time?
Those would be questions for law enforcement. Right now, I need to respect the investigations that they're doing, but rest assured that they are chasing every possible lead down to make sure that we have more answers, and hopefully they can share some of those, in the next 30 minutes when they have a briefing.
But you would be aware if there were any extremist mosques in the area or any kind of activity like that, would you not?
I'm not aware of anything like that locally. This is a community that cares for one another. There are mosques. I have been to mosques and prayer with individuals in this community for years, and it's a loving community. So I'm not aware of anything like that, no.
But in your mind, do you consider this terrorism, whether or not it's Islamic or not?
This is an act of terror on the community of San Bernardino. Somebody having assault weapons and body armor, and the thoughtful planning that went into this with pipe bombs. That's an act of terror on our community, and that's tough to deal with. But that's how I would describe it at this point. And I'll let law enforcement officials and lawyers classify and worry about the official definitions. But from my perspective in the community, this was an act of terror.
As is what happened after Sandy Hook, this has reignited the whole issue of gun control, and yet California has the strictest gun laws in the whole nation that did not prevent this kind of thing. When you found out that they were in possession of AR-15 type weapons for this attack, did it surprise you? Those are very difficult to get in your state.
Well, yes, but we're 3 hours away drive to the Nevada border. So California is not an island. And so the first thing I thought of when I heard assault weapons were used was that the assault weapons ban expired in 2004. And that's something we can and should address in the coming days and weeks ahead.
You're referring to the federal assault weapon ban that expired?
I am.
So are you calling for tighter gun control now, not just in your state, but on a national level?
This is a broader conversation that we need to have at a national level. We can't rely on states to have piecemeal approaches to gun reform. There are universal background checks that we can and should be doing. There are the assault weapons ban. We don't even allow the research at the federal level to look into gun violence. That's something that we need to address.
Congressman, I know you've been working around the clock, so you probably haven't seen some of the newspaper headlines that have come out since this terrible attack. But one of the New York-based tabloids had the headline this morning, Muslim Killers. And it made me think about the Colorado Springs attack that just happened. There was no headline saying Christian killer. Do you think this is helpful to before it's even been identified as being based in any kind of ideology, to have those kinds of words and headlines out there?
I don't think it's helpful. I think this was an act of terror, as I mentioned, on my community. That's how I would classify it. It is murder, and it is unfortunate that these families in our community is still having to deal with that, and will for many, many months and years to come.
Is there a sense of fear now in San Bernardino that this might not be over?
No, the community wants to move past this, but we have to understand, what got us here. But the community's, just working to build itself back up, and this community in San Bernardino has struggled for years. And so to have this to have this happen, this mass shooting happen, has been incredibly difficult given the economic issues that this region has also faced.
All right, Congressman Pete Aguilar, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We know the fate of the couple directly involved in Wednesday's attack, but what's next for investigators? CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman joined Anne-Marie Green and Meg Oliver earlier to discuss what the FBI will be looking for.
I think what we have to do is look to what happened in the Boston Marathon bombing and the Tsarnaev brothers. It was not as simple when the prosecution, the FBI, the local police went forward in their investigation to say, well, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, the elder, he's dead. Let's just concentrate on Johar, the younger. They didn't do that, and they're not going to do that here. You are going to look at relatives. You are going to look at friends. You are going to do what police should always do, what the FBI should always do, which is go through every piece of evidence that could lead you to the potentiality of other people, not only who may have helped, and therefore that you get a conspiracy theory, but you also are looking for the potential of prevention. Because when you hear about this garage, when you hear about this IED factory, it does certainly appear, without having to think very much about it, that there was the possibility of planning of other acts here. So where do we go? We look at the computers. We look at their accounts on social media. But also we're looking at their cell phones. We want to see every contact that they have had. Now, you understand, of course, what will raise its ugly head as a result of this. People will say our civil liberties are being trampled. You are coming to us solely because we are of Muslim descent and we happen to know these people. Well, we found out in the Boston Marathon bombing that you had Johar Tsarnaev, behaving as if he were the American boy, looked like he had the good life, just like this suspect who is now deceased, and he had friends. His friends moved the backpack, they moved materials, they also had statements that came to them. This is the beginning of an investigation, not the end.
Let's talk about the suspect's mother. She
Yes.
was left with the baby. We're hearing reports that they all lived together in that Redlands home. As you mentioned, in the garage, authorities found what looks like an IED factory. When we talked to the former FBI profiler, she said one thing that they look for is leakage. And did people know of things?
Of course.
So could that suspect's mother potentially be charged?
She could potentially be charged if, in fact, they can really show that she knew of things and that she might have participated in some way. It's not simply mere knowledge, but it has to be something more than that. And do you have a duty? We always ask this. Do you have a duty if you know that someone may be preparing to do a crime or a terrorist act? Do you have a duty to inform authorities? So I think that this is an area that will become not only fruitful in this case, potentially, but in other cases in the future. You know, we looked at that back again in the Boston Marathon case at the wife of the older brother who had lived with them. I mean, they built those bombs in those pressure cookers somewhere. So what did people know, and when did they know it? I would predict that this investigation is going to take not days or weeks. This investigation is going to take months.
I'm wondering now, what factors need to be present to elevate this to a federal level where there could be federal charges?
Oh, I think that once you have the idea of getting it into the terrorism realm, that what you're ultimately dealing with is the federal government is looking for a way to be able to prosecute things federally. Obviously, in Boston, you had weapons of mass destruction, you had bombs. Here, you don't really have bombs that are used, you have guns. But what you wind up doing is that the federal government will work in partnership. I'd say this, looking at California, the federal government really doesn't have to get involved in the sense that if there are other people out there, does it have to be a federal prosecution? It can be a state prosecution. But these joint terrorism task forces, which have been formed over the last number of years, since September 11th, 2001, they are really fully functioning. And you have partnership with the FBI and with the local police. And the one in Los Angeles that would cover this area is one of the great joint terrorism task forces. There has been an enormous amount of cooperation amongst those agencies over the years. As you know, I lived there and saw it close up and firsthand from 2002 to 2009. That Joint Terrorism Task Force, just like the one in New York, we are really glad that there is cooperation. What courthouse it ultimately winds up in really doesn't matter in the end, as long as you have competent prosecutors who are going forward. The difficulty here, really the difficulty here, is does anyone else really know anything? Did they encourage? Did they dispose of evidence? Or were they simply just people hanging around?
I want to ask you about the weapons. ATF has confirmed that all 4 guns have been traced. They were purchased legally. 2 of the guns were purchased by someone who was already known in the investigation. What kind of charges could that person face?
It depends. I hate to be so vague with you. If you purchase a gun as a straw purchaser, that is, that you have gone in to purchase a gun for someone else, but you have said it will be your own, that's a problem under the law. If also you've purchased a gun and you have sold it or given it to someone who you know is going to commit a crime, especially a crime of this extraordinary magnitude, then they will look to prosecute that person. These are very wiggly areas of the law.
And we are awaiting a press conference from San Bernardino Police in the next 20 minutes. We're going to bring it to you live as soon as it starts. For now, our coverage continues with a first-hand account from a witness who saw the attack unfold. What he says happened. We'll have that when we come back.
Try to relax, everyone. Try to relax. I'll take a bullet before you do. That's for damn sure. Just be cool, okay? Both elevators. Wait till they both get here. Don't let them stack like that. Get them in the hall. We're going safe.
Go, go, go.
Come on, come on in.
I'll take a bullet before you do. That from a law enforcement officer to the people who were evacuating that center after the massacre happened. A social worker at the Inland Regional Medical Center was able to record video of the moments following that shooting. He captured video of the aftermath of the rampage on his cell phone. He described what he saw to CBS This Morning's co-host Nora O'Donnell earlier today.
I was in building 2, third floor in the regional center, which is right next to where the shooting was occurring in auditorium A and B. I was in one of my colleagues' offices overlooking through the window.
How did you know that a shooting had occurred?
At the time, I was in my office doing paperwork, listening to music, and I got a text from a colleague stating there was an active shooter. At that time, I thought it was just maybe somebody walking around the grounds with a gun or just maybe something happening. So either way, I got up out of my desk, opened my door, went in the hallway, and I saw my colleagues running around, screaming, crying, frantic. So I actually took into effect that it may be something more serious than what it is.
They said we need to get into lockdown.
Yes, we're being advised to go into a conference room, barricade ourselves with chairs and tables, lay down on the ground, make sure everything's okay. At that time, I heard there was 2 bodies down, but I instinctually, me being me, had to see what was happening. So I took my own advice to go look out a window to see what I can see.
In fact, you took out your iPhone.
Yes, I did.
And you had a bird's eye view of the entrance and the exit that the shooters went in.
Correct. I took out my phone instinctually and started recording what I could for just effect to see everything so I can have proof if anything comes to or anything with the police or if anything else happens.
We're looking at that video right now. What did you see first?
At first, what I saw was the SWAT team coming into the back door, about 5 or 6, storming into A and B, looking for active shooter, as well to the west side of the building. There was police standing at the door, going in for an active shooter. As well on the back, there was a gentleman deceased on the bench, I assumed, as well a female about 10 to 15 feet away, laying in a pool of blood, deceased as well.
You think they were trying to flee and then were shot when they were trying to flee?
Correct. The female, I assume, due to her positioning and what she was facing with her back to the building, she was fleeing. The gentleman, I assume that he was having a smoke break or just enjoying a bench, and he was shot either on the exit or the entrance of the assailants.
The response from the police was very quick.
Very quick, very powerful. SWAT, San Bernardino PD, CHP, sheriff, pretty much you name it was there within minutes as well to do everything they could to protect us as well to try to apprehend the active shooter.
Did you see any of the shooters?
No, unfortunately. My office was on the north side of the building and the shooting was on the south side. By the time I got there, it was about 15 minutes after the shooting, and that's when the police department and everybody were pulling body after body out of auditorium A and B.
I think that's one of the most disturbing things about your video, to see them bringing some of the bodies out. How were they doing that?
They were grabbing it as much as they could, arms, feet. They had them in chairs, just trying to get them out of harm's way. And trying to get them just out to clear, seeing if they're critical and or deceased, and just trying to clear out as much as they could.
Get everybody the medical help they needed immediately.
Correct.
When did you realize how grave this situation was?
It was probably about the 6th body coming out, just seeing the effect of it all. At first I saw the 2 bodies, I'm like, okay, it's 2 bodies, not saying it's not bad, but it's 2 bodies, it may not be that bad. And then third body, fourth body, fifth body. By the 12th body, I stopped counting.
You saw 12 bodies.
At least 12, including the 2 there. I think I counted up to 13 when I was finally seen from the ground level by the police that acquired their weapons at me with the reflection. And at that time, I thought it was a good time to stop recording and get to safety.
You realized that it was, that this is still. Did you think that there might still be an active shooter on the grounds?
No, honestly, with the training I've been going through with the San Bernardino City School District, with the task force I went, and just common sense, realistically, I don't think anybody would stay there on grounds. I thought within
you've
minutes.
Been through training already from San Bernardino for an active shooter situation?
Correct. I'm in with a task force with the San Bernardino City School District to work as this. We started after Sandy Hook a few years ago. We started a program here in San Bernardino City. As well, Regional Center has with the SWAT team of San Bernardino City Police. We're doing active shooting. We actually just had a training, which is coincidental, for active shooting.
When was the training that you had for an active shooter?
I believe it was last week, but I know we have another one coming up in February.
So you had just been through an active shooter training.
Correct.
That had been put in place after Newtown and Sandy Hook.
Correct. And we have the city school district, we have an active shooter where different teams come together, SWAT and everybody, FBI, Homeland Security, with the school district that I'm a part of here in San Bernardino.
When you hear that this is now the worst mass shooting since Sandy Hook, what do you think?
I learned that last night watching 3-4 hours. I didn't watch news until last night, and it was just intense knowing that I actually was part of it, and the part of that I had, whatever it may be, to record what I did. It's intense. You don't realize what it is until you get out of the situation.
What lessons will you take from this?
So many. Don't take anything for granted. I mean, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. Sorry. So I thought about her and then everything else I could, and just realized that, you know, when you're going into work, it may be last time coming in, and thought about a lot of different things.
You thought about your daughter?
Yeah.
I'm glad you're okay.
Thank you.
Chimney Hilliard, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Moments from now, San Bernardino police will be giving us an update on the investigation. We're going to bring that to you live here on CBSN as soon as it starts. In the meantime, we are learning more about the suspects behind the shooting. We'll have those details after we take a quick break. A clearer picture is beginning to emerge of the couple suspected of plotting yesterday's shooting in California. As we said, CBS News has confirmed that Syed Farouk traveled to Saudi Arabia in July of 2014 to pick up his then fiancée, Tashfeen Malik. Law enforcement officials said he was in that country for 2 weeks. Earlier, my colleagues Anne-Marie Green and Meg Oliver spoke to Mary Ellen O'Toole, a former senior criminal profiler for the FBI. She has 25 years experience investigating mass shootings, including Columbine. She explained what makes this attack different.
It's typical of how we inaccurately read people. We have this idea that if somebody comes across to us as being quiet or very normal, non-confrontational, that they're safe and they're non-threatening. And we associate anger with what we saw yesterday. There was probably little anger at that crime scene. That was hatred. And that's a very different emotion. So when people say, but he didn't seem to be angry, well, yes, he wasn't angry, and appearing normal does not mean you can't be dangerous. And here's the other thing: if you're planning a secret military-style mission, you're not going to tell people and act in an angry manner and bring attention to yourself before it happens if you want to carry it out. So it makes sense to me that his co-workers described him exactly as they did, and I think he intended for people to see him like that so he could get away with this.
Mary Ellen, this is the first tandem mass shooting since Columbine. What does that tell you?
Again, it doesn't happen very often, and this is particularly different because you have a male and a female. Each person needs to be equally committed at some level to this type of violence. But what I'm waiting to hear is from the surviving victims, what was the female's role in this shooting? Was she standing there a la Patty Hearst many, many years ago, standing in the bank just holding that weapon, or was she actively engaged in the shooting? For me, that's going to be very telling about her commitment to this mission.
Now, I want to clarify once again that investigators are looking at all sorts of motives. They're not ruling anything out. They're not ruling out terrorism, but they're not ruling anything out either. I say that because I'm going to bring up the study that that was released earlier this week about ISIS in America, and one of the things that it discussed was how people who are ISIS sympathizers in this country spend a lot of time online reading, but very few of them actually become active. I want to ask you, are there triggers? Are there things that people should look out for when someone, as you mentioned, may be harboring hatred or anger, and things that you should look out for, but that may indicate that they're going to take it to another level?
Some of the red flags include leaking behavior, and the co-workers may not necessarily be aware of comments that he made prior to the attack. But leakage is a very strong predictor of what could happen, and it's a forecasting on the part of the shooter that this is what I intend to do, and it may not be completely direct. It may be indirect. But people who really are much closer to the shooters would be in a much better position to notice their behavior. And that would include the leakage, but it would include other things as well. Sort of, for example, separating themselves from everyday activities, knowing that tomorrow is the day that I'm going to go in and commit this shooting. So I don't care so much about brushing my hair and, wearing nice clothes and adhering to all my regular routines. So they detach from what's normal and attach to the plans, to the mission that they're about to carry out. And those are the kinds of behaviors that maybe a roommate or a parent or an in-law would note and be particularly aware of. Those are the people we need to call in, but too often that doesn't happen.
And the other thing that everybody is talking about and will probably lead to more answers after they investigate it is the cache of weapons, the AR-15 style rifles. What does that tell you, the type of weapons they use? Does that trigger something for you?
It does. I call it very mission-oriented shooter. These are people that are very purposefully tuned in and prepared at all costs to themselves and anybody else around them to carry out this mission. In order to do that, they bring in excessive firepower that they could never use in its totality. They bring in explosives. They bring in as much as they can possibly carry on their person or put in their car, but it's done because they are so intent on carrying out a mission. The other thing I think here we need to consider is that they weren't done yesterday when they left that first venue. There may have been subsequent subsequent venues they were intending to attack.
And as we've been telling you, any moment now, the San Bernardino police chief will be holding a briefing on the shooting. We're going to take you there as soon as it starts. But for now, we're going to turn to the politics playing out in the wake of the shooting. Republicans now under fire over gun control, accused of not doing enough. Coming up, how the GOP is responding. There's been a great deal of focus on how politicians responded to the California shootings, with many critics saying tweets of prayers won't do anything to stop more attacks. The public's frustration comes after repeated mass shootings in this country. From 2000 to 2006, the FBI reported 45 incidents. Then over the next 7 years, that number doubled, more than doubled. 60% of those shootings ended before officers arrived. GOP presidential candidates Carly Fiorina and Rand Paul also weighed in. All right, we'll get that to you shortly. Jeffrey Butts is here. He's the director of the Research and Evaluation Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He joins us now. A lot of the talk has been about California being one of the states with the most strict gun control laws. Does that make a difference in cases like this?
Well, strict is a very relative concept. We have very few rigorous gun controls, and the term gun control is too general to mean anything practical. So we need to get down to the point at which we're talking about effective, direct regulatory matters that can help reduce the chances of this kind of incident.
You're a numbers guy. You've been studying these statistics. It seems like violence is on the rise in this country. Is it, in fact?
It's actually not. The violence is down by about 50% since 20 years ago. If you look at the overall numbers, your chances of being a victim of a homicide or a violent crime are half what they were just 20 years ago.
Now, we've been talking about how the mass shootings, though, has been on the increase in the past 7 years. How many of these are related to Islamic terrorism?
First of all, the number of mass shootings, even though it's very concerning and we react strongly to every incident, are low compared to the overall violence rate. About 100 people a day are killed with guns in the United States. And overall, the level of mass shootings contributes very little to that.
And are homicide rates in America higher than around the world?
Homicide rates are not higher than they are around the world. Some Latin American countries, for example, have homicide rates that are 2-3 times ours. Gun violence rates we are by far number one. So when we kill each other, we use guns. In other countries, they use different methods.
Dr. Butts, if you could hold on for a second. We want to go to the Carly Fiorina sound right now to hear what some of the politicians are saying about this.
Despite the headline in the daily news, the first thing I did was say a prayer. Say a prayer for and say a prayer especially for our first responders. And then we need to ask some tough questions.
For people to mock religion, to mock prayer, and then to act as if there's some law that's going to fix this, you know, there may well be, but it may not be a gun control law. It may well be a law that says we shouldn't admit people to this country from certain parts of the world with their intent on killing us.
You've looked at the real instances over the years. What do you think should be done to try to lessen this?
Well, it's nice that people feel compassion, and when they say they're praying, I think that means they feel the anguish and they're feeling compassion. But we also need actual policies. And I would agree with Senator Rand that the most effective policies may not be directly targeted on gun control. I think if you look across the spectrum of violent behavior, most violent acts are committed by people who aren't sufficiently tied into family structure and community, or they're motivated by some other kinds of hate. So the whole phenomenon of terrorism is someone motivated to behave violently because they think they have a higher order calling. And we need to address that.
And there's also the issue that has been bandied about a lot is the mentally ill and their ease of getting access to guns.
Yeah, I think the mental health discussion is often used as a diversionary tactic by people who don't want to address gun violence. And it's true, it's relevant, and we should have a good mental health structure in this country, and we do not. But that's not an answer to all gun violence, because not all people are mentally ill that commit drastic acts of violence.
Looking at the data of these mass shootings over the years, I'm thinking about something that one of the other candidates, Dr. Ben Carson, said after a mass shooting. He said, well, it wouldn't have happened to me because I would have attacked the attackers. In reality, when this is going on, what are people experiencing? What are they able to do in that kind of a circumstance?
Yeah, everyone's tough in a hypothetical scenario. I think most people in these situations immediately try to get cover. They try to protect each other. You hear all kinds of stories about people watching out for each other and warning their friends and other people in the environment. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that people can react violently immediately to a violent assault.
What about having an armed populace, like has been suggested by so many of candidates and other people?
We do have an armed populace, and that's why we have more gun homicides than anyone else in the world, because so many people are walking around with firearms.
All right. Dr. Jeffrey Butts, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it very much. Coming up, House Speaker Paul Ryan gets set to make his first major address, and we're told it will include a push for legislation aimed at preventing more such mass shootings. Our coverage continues right after this break. All right, it looks like the press conference is about to begin shortly. The police in San Bernardino, California, are going to update us on the investigation. What they're trying to figure out, which is the question on everybody's mind, is what was the motivation behind these two people deciding to go into a place that was really there to take care of disabled people and start shooting it up and kill as many people as they could. They ended up killing 14. They wounded 17 in the actual event itself. A police officer was wounded in the subsequent firefight with the suspects and police. He was, by all reports, injured by a ricochet there. These two individuals had AR-15 type semi-automatic assault type weapons. That's a broad definition, but that's how they're being described. And they also had some semi-automatic handguns that they used. I'm just watching to see if they're taking the podium now. They're not quite yet, so we'll just hang on until they get there. But Farouk, one of the main suspects, who is deceased, as is his wife or fiance, we're not clear yet whether they actually were married or have not gotten married yet, but they have a 6-month-old daughter. And they're taking the podium now, so I'm going to go ahead and be quiet and let the officers give us an update here.
Are we ready to go? All right, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Jared Burguan, J-A-R-R-O-D, last of B-U-R-G-U-A-N, Chief of Police here in San Bernardino. I also have Sheriff McMahon with me, and we have Congressman Pete Aguilar and County Board of Supervisor James Ramos joining us this morning as well. I want to start this off by reiterating that how incredibly tragic this is. And we've got a lot of families that are clearly devastated by what happened here. And we need to be sensitive to that. And I want it put out to those families out there that our prayers are with them and that we are here to support them any way that we can. Some updated numbers. Same as yesterday, we have 14 people that are confirmed dead in this incident. The number of wounded has risen from 17 to 21, and they are being treated at various local hospitals. We were asked yesterday about the number of officers that responded. We are still compiling the total number of officers that responded here at 11 o'clock when the initial call of the shooting went out. Our rough count right now is about 300 officers from local, county, state, and federal agencies that responded for the initial active shooter component of this and helped deal with the crime scene here. Many of those assets also moved and were part of the investigation and the officer-involved shooting that followed. Here at the scene at the Inland Regional Center, what we have total is we believe the suspects, when they entered, fired somewhere between 65 and 75 rounds from their rifles at the scene. We did locate the one pipe bomb. There was actually 3 pipe bombs combined into one that had a remote control car type remote control device that appears to have not have worked in this case. There were also 4 high capacity .223 rifle magazines that were dropped by the suspects and left in there as evidence that have been recovered. I can confirm that the suspects were wearing the black style tactical gear that we talked about yesterday. They were not wearing ballistic bulletproof vests. What they did have, and what people may have confused, is they had tactical style vests that held equipment and magazines and ammunition and that sort of stuff. Sorry? Yeah, load-bearing gear. On the officer-involved shooting that took place a couple of hours after the incident, we talked yesterday about how that came to be, how we ended up at that point in the investigation, and what we were following up on. On the officer-involved shooting that occurred, we had 7 police agencies that were involved in that shooting, including our department, the Sheriff's Department. I think we had 14 of our police officers involved. And then there were various other agencies that were all part of some of the local task force that had come to assist in the initial response. Of the 7 agencies involved, we had 23 officers that were actually fired their weapons at the suspects. Law enforcement fired approximately 380 rounds at the suspects. Both of them were killed here at the scene. The suspects are believed to have fired about 76 rifle rounds at the officers at the termination of the pursuit. How many? 76 is our number that we have right now. However, on them, on their person, on their body, and in the vehicle, they had over 1,400 .223 caliber rounds that were available to them, and they had over 209 millimeter rounds on their persons as well. 209 millimeter rounds. We talked about yesterday they had the 2 .223 assault style weapons, rifles, and they had 9mm pistols with them.
You said 1,400 on the 223?
1,400 on the 1,400 .223 rounds, 200 9mm rounds.
On their person?
On their person, yes. On their person or immediately in the vehicle around and available to them. Let me get to a few others. We had 2 officers that were injured in that incident. One of them was a San Bernardino police officer that sustained a gunshot wound to his left leg. He was taken to a local hospital last night. He is probably going to be released this morning if he has not already been released. His injuries are not life-threatening. I did visit with him in the hospital last night. He's in good spirits. We also, as of this morning, learned that there was a second deputy that was also injured in the incident, sustained some cuts to his leg that we believe probably came from broken glass or shrapnel. We're not exactly sure, but 2 officers total were injured in that exchange. The house in Redlands that became part of the focus of this investigation yesterday. I will confirm that the search that took place revealed that there were 12 pipe bomb type devices found in that house or in the garage to that house. There were also hundreds of tools, many of which could be used to construct IEDs or pipe bombs. And in addition to that, they had other material to have produced some additional bombs as well. There were another 2,000 9mm rounds found at that house, over 2,500 .223 rounds that were found at that house, and then there were 2,500, and there were additional several hundred .22 long rifle rounds that were found there. So with that, I'm here to talk about the specifics of the investigation and what we discovered evidence-wise. I think the FBI's got some comments to make a little bit later in this. Do you have any questions for me?
Do you believe they were planning another attack?
We don't know. Clearly they were equipped and they could have continued to do another attack. We intercepted them before that happened, obviously. So the investigation is still going on, and I don't think we're prepared to talk about other people that we might be looking for. We are confident that the 2 people that were involved in the shooting here are the 2 dead suspects that we have at the scene, and we do not have any credible information to indicate that there is an immediate threat to anybody in the area or anybody in the region. Can't hear everybody. Brian?
The remote control car that was with the pipe bombs, can you elaborate what that was?
So I'm not an expert on it. It's my understanding that somehow it was 3 pipe bombs that were attached together, somehow attached to this remote control car, and it was designed that the remote control device would somehow trigger or set that device off. We don't know if they attempted to do that and it failed or what the story is.
Was it attached to a car that was driving, that was moving?
It was found in a bag that was there at the scene.
Was Sahuk in contact with terrorists via email, via social media?
I'm going to let the FBI address those particular issues. The GoPro is not confirmed. We do not have any information the suspects had any GoPros on them, or any cameras of any sort that was on them.
Based on your interviews with all the eyewitnesses, can you tell us exactly what happened in the room, and do you still believe that there was some dispute and they left and came back? This seems very much pre-planned.
So we have people in the room that have indicated that the suspect was in the room during the early part of this meeting or party type event. It was a county public health Christmas holiday type gathering luncheon is what it was. He was part of that. He was there early on and he left. We did have some initial information that he left under some kind of duress or as if he was angry. We also had somebody else say that, he just kind of disappeared and we don't know where he went from there. So I don't know that we know enough about that yet, but we will confirm that he was there early on.
And do you have any motive for this shooting, sir? Do you have any motive?
We still don't have the motive.
How they got in the building? Were they targeting anyone in particular?
So the building that this took place in, I'm sure you guys all have aerial views of IRC and what it is. So this took place in the southernmost building on the property. The doors that they entered were located on the east side. So they entered from that parking lot into those east doors, which went directly into the room, which is where the shooting took place. Those doors were unlocked. It was an open party to those folks. Well, they sprayed the room with bullets, so I don't know that there was any one person that they ultimately targeted. They killed 14 people there.
How long was he? Is there any indication that any idea how long time elapsed when he supposedly got this argument, left, and any idea where his wife was from?
I have to apologize. I meant to follow up on that question, and I failed to ask that today. Yesterday, we had information that is anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. I'll try to tie that up by later on in the day.
It seems hard to believe that all of this was spontaneous. And how can he get...
Oh no, we said yesterday that there appears to be a degree of planning that went into this. Nobody just gets upset at a party, goes home, and puts together that kind of an elaborate scheme or plan to come back and do that. So there was some planning that went into this. I don't think we are far enough into the investigation to really be able to definitively say what that pattern has been, or every place that they have been and what they've been doing over the last several months or several years. That's the part that we're still working on, though.
Did he have a grudge against his coworkers?
Not that I'm personally aware of, but I think at some point later today we'll probably have a comment from his employer in the county to talk about some of those issues.
He was no longer an employee, right, at the center. Why was he invited back to this party?
It's my understanding he was still an employee of the county.
Where did he buy his guns from, do you know?
The guns were legally purchased. The 2 handguns were purchased by him. The rifles were not, but those are components that we are still following up on. All 4 guns were legally purchased. I'm sorry. There's no criminal record that he had that we're aware of.
Who lived in the house?
Tell us about the getaway car. We're told, we've heard some reports there was a Utah license plate. Any idea on how it was acquired? What Utah license?
It was a black Ford Excursion, the big Expedition or Expedition, I'm sorry, a black Ford Expedition. It was a rental car. He rented it 3 or 4 days ago. It was actually due to be returned yesterday. And that's why it had Utah plates, but it was rented locally.
Where did he rent it? About his travels overseas, is there any connection that something was planned by that?
I'll let the FBI discuss that. Those are things that they're working on.
Chief, have you been able to identify all the victims and notify next of kin?
So our plan today is we're going to do a morning press conference. Throughout the course of the day, Sheriff McMahon in the coroner's office is going to start releasing the names of the victims. We've been working throughout the night to get identity of those folks and then make notifications. So we will start to put those names out here fairly soon. We're going to probably try to get some pictures out for you as well, and probably try to move the media a little closer to the scene for you. And then we'll come back and do a press conference later on. But throughout the course of the day, we anticipate we'll start releasing the names of the victims. I do not know if they all were. Several of them we believe are.
Yesterday you talked about the resolve of your officers, the prolonged actions they took in the field. Can you talk about this community and how you see them being able to move on past this in the coming days?
You know, I read an article by one of the reporters in the press, the Sun, this morning, and she talked about the resiliency of this community. And the fact everybody knows San Bernardino's been beaten up with the bankruptcy and some of the things that have hit this community, and economically this community has been hit hard. But this is a pretty resilient community. We will survive this. We've had an enormous groundswell of support from our neighboring communities and well wishes that have come in from all over the place. I do know that there is a candlelight vigil planned later tonight. I believe it's at the stadium on East Street. And I think you'll see evidence there of a tremendous amount of support and people that are going to come together and support. As far as the officers, everything that I've seen and all the officers from my department that I've contacted, they're doing extraordinarily well. I'll tell you, as the chief of this agency, I'm incredibly proud of the way that our folks responded. Not only the initial response here and the help that we got from our local and regional partners, but for the way that they also engaged in that officer-involved shooting and chasing down those suspects. That was nothing short of heroic, and extremely proud of the way that they handled that.
Chief, were your officers wearing body cams?
The guns were legally purchased, but is it legal to have those long guns here in California? Are those?
So I think there's some questions still about whether they were California legal or not. We have not gotten to the bottom of that, and I'll let ATF address that later on. But we do know at this point that the 4 guns were purchased, appeared to be a legal purchase, and appeared to be registered.
Chief, can you keep this officers wearing body cams?
None of our officers had body cams. I don't know about all the other agencies.
Who was living in the
Chief, you may have
ammunition legally?
The child, is the child in custody somewhere?
I'm not sure where the child is. I know that they had a 6-month-old child. I don't know exactly where she is.
Chief, you may have answered.
That's that much ammunition legally?
I don't think we have restrictions on the volume of ammunition. You may educate me on that, but I'm not aware of any law that dictates.
Anything on the ammunition that's illegal other than?
Offhand, I'm not specifically aware of anything that was against the law there.
Chief, can you tell us more about the search of the Redland home, what you're looking for, what else you may have found beside the ammunition that helps you in seeking the motive?
And who lived there?
So the suspect and both suspects were listed on the rental agreement for the property. As I said yesterday, I don't know that we can definitively say that they were living there or if they were living elsewhere, and what exactly that house was used for. The house became a focus of the investigation based upon information that we had from witnesses that identified him as an employee that was there that they thought was potentially involved. And it was follow-up that we had done connected to that person that took us to that house, led us to that vehicle, which resulted in us in the following and the pursuit and the shooting that happened. Obviously, once we were involved in that, the house became a primary focus. So we took our time in securing it, making sure we went in that house, we cleared it safely. That's where we discovered the other pipe bombs, and I think some other evidence, computer evidence, cell phones, things like that have been recovered from there in various other places.
Chief, come out from that search that helped you?
I think there's a lot of helpful information that we've gotten from a number of areas.
How many teams are active right now?
Those people who gave you help, they've been able to provide you with any kind of an accounting of how many people were going in and out of that house other than the two people who lived there? Was there a pattern of men coming, going at all times?
We're still working and trying. Obviously, I think we've heard the rumors that you guys have heard, and we've got some information, but I think we're still trying to verify that. Keep in mind that I'm pretty careful that when I come up here, as I said yesterday, information that went out yesterday is likely to change today and tomorrow and so on. I mean, already the wounded number has changed. I want to be as accurate as we possibly can, and a lot of that type of stuff ends up being speculation or hearsay, and I'd like to confirm it before we say it.
Regarding the phones and the computers that were taken that have been searched, is there anything you can shed or talk to us about what that is shed on, what these people do, or who they knew?
So there's been a number of electronic items from thumb drives to computers and cell phones that have been taken. I don't think we've completed the analysis on them yet, so I don't know what, if any, they've actually completed yet. Real quickly, Dave from the FBI's here. He's got a few comments, so I'm gonna let him do, and then we'll come up and finish a few more questions.
Chief, real quick, was there any surveillance at the building? Do they want to know?
It's my understanding there was no specific surveillance that was inside the room where the shooting took place. We are, however, in possession of surveillance cameras from the area, and we're still going through that evidence.
Good
morning. I'm David Bowditch, the Assistant Director in charge of the FBI in Los Angeles. First of all, I want to focus on 2 points. First off, again, our hearts and our prayers are with the families of all these victims of this very heinous act. Secondly, I ask you to be patient. We are trying to give you little bits as we can as we ascertain more and more facts. As you can tell by this investigation and even the media response here today, this is not your average investigation. We have multiple scenes, we have many victims, and it will take time. There are a tremendous number of assets and resources being applied to this investigation. My focus as a fact finder who works for an organization that is really fixated on facts is I would much rather be slower and correct with the information that comes out to you than fast and incorrect. It's incredibly important for us because the integrity of this investigation is absolutely paramount as far as our concerns, absent other than taking care of the victims. So we are applying a number of federal resources. We are continuing to work very, very carefully with our partners here at San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, San Bernardino City Police Department, and the ATF. These resources are being applied for a number of reasons. I'll give you an example of some things we're doing today. We flew in a team to do some, from Washington, to do some reenactment, reconstruction of the crime scene. We have continued collecting evidence and are continuing to collect evidence at the multiple scenes. We are going to fly some evidence back to our laboratory in Washington, D.C. today on a plane. That is because we want expeditious analysis of that evidence. As far as the digital media that was asked about earlier, the digital media is incredibly important because we are trying to determine the motive. We do not yet know the motive. We cannot rule anything out at this point. And we're hoping that some of that digital media exploitation will help us and assist us in obtaining some of that. Again, it would be irresponsible of me, and it would be way too early for us to speculate on motive of why this occurred. Any questions for the FBI?
So why is the motive so important to the FBI?
Have you found any information that says that he did this in the name of religion, or that or with all this ammunition, it's part of a larger group and a larger plot, or maybe he was planning a different attack and got ticked off and decided, okay, I'm just going to turn on these guys.
So again, if you look at the amount of obvious pre-planning that went in, the amount of armaments that he had, the weapons and the ammunition, there was obviously a mission here. We know that. We do not know why. We don't know if this was the intended target or if there was something that triggered him to do this immediately. We just don't know. And again, that's going to take time for us to get to that answer.
Was he in touch with subjects, international subjects, that the FBI or that the authorities were already interested in
International subjects, we are still working through that. We know there was some international travel. They came into the U.S., both he and she was not his wife at the time, but she is now. They both came into the U.S. in July of 2014. They have since had a baby together. He is a U.S. person. She is still here on a K-1 visa.
Do you believe this international travel is connected in any way to this massacre?
We do not know. It's certainly something we're going to look into very, very carefully.
What do you know about the communications that he had with investigative subjects, terrorism subjects that the FBI had under investigation?
I did not hear you.
What can you tell us about any communications he had with terrorism subjects that the FBI had been investigating?
We're still working through that, and again, that goes towards the flow of and the pace of the information. I want to make sure we're absolutely correct before we put that out.
Here in the United States, the FBI was investigating.
We're still working through that.
6 months ago, he was abroad. What countries was he traveling to, and how long had he been?
Pardon me?
How long had he been out of the country, and what countries has he visited?
It appears that he came back into the U.S. in July of 2014, as I said earlier. I do not know all the countries he visited. We know he did go to Pakistan at one point. We know she is here on a K-1 visa under a Pakistani passport.
What can you tell us about a trip to Saudi Arabia?
Don't have all the facts yet.
How much do you know about her that would explain why she got involved in this caper?
We don't know enough. We do not know enough. I'm going to take 2 more questions.
Is there any evidence that these IEDs were...
How close are you to making that determination?
Again, it would be irresponsible and premature of me to call this terrorism. The FBI defines terrorism very specifically, and we are still, that is the big question for us, is what is the motivation for this? First and foremost, the integrity of this investigation, again, is paramount. Secondly, it's ultimately to determine the motive and the inspiration for this attack.
The IEDs that were found, how would you describe it as much of destruction? Was it professional or was it amateurish? Was there high-grade military explosives used there or black powder?
Well, I'm not an expert either, as the chief mentioned earlier, so I don't want to go too deep. I will say there is some level of sophistication, certainly, when you're tying them together and you have seemingly a remote-controlled car that is attached to the device. I'm going to take one more question, and I'm going to turn it back to the chief. Yes, ma'am.
Based off of any kind of designs with Inspire magazine?
I didn't hear you.
Any type of evidence that shows a linkage between the designs of the IEDs and Inspire magazine?
We knew that question would come up, and we're looking into it as we speak. Chief?
Chief, was he ever on anybody's radar screen at all? Did you ever have any prior knowledge of him or the FBI or anybody anywhere?
He was not on the radar screen of our agency prior to yesterday. Let me go over a couple details. Our plan today is, as I said early on, we're going to do this press conference now. Throughout the course of the day, we're going to do what we can to release the names of the victims, focus in on those folks. We'll probably try to get you some photos, and as I said, we're going to try to move the media a little bit closer. We will come back with another press conference at the end of the business day, 4 or 5 o'clock. Hopefully we'll have significantly more information for you by then. And then we'll kind of play it by ear. So with that, I'll take a couple more questions, and then I think we're going to cut it off.
Did you determine that he was a suspect, and how did you determine that he was a suspect?
So as I said yesterday when we did our early press conferences, there was we got a couple of tips, and we were following up on a couple different leads. This was one of the tips that we followed up on very early on. Where that came from was another person that was in the building that knew him, that identified him by name, who expressed some concern over his behavior prior to the event and the way that he left. Following up on that information, we discovered that he had rented a vehicle that was similar to the suspect description that we had received, and we also followed up on addresses that we had more than just that address in Redlands. But the address in Redlands is one that we followed up on, and the rest is obviously we know how that played out.
Were there any traps or anything for law enforcement at the house in Redlands?
There were things that, as our officers approached, gave them concern that I don't know if the word booby-trapped is appropriate, but there was concern that they did not want to go in immediately. They wanted to approach it very, very carefully and very tactfully, tactically. And for that reason, we actually used the FBI tactical team for that, because we were stretched so thin here. So the FBI came with their bomb folks. I think the Sheriff's Department may have helped with that component as well. And we used their team to do it. The initial officers that were there and secured the house were not the ones that made entry. We did wait until tactically they did it appropriately.
motives or any type of information?
There's nothing definitive that we have right now that points directly to a motive. I have not been made aware of any notes.
Have all the bodies been removed, identified, and families notified?
We are still working on that. It's been a slow process. So when this happened, the sprinklers, the fire sprinklers in the room had actually gone off. We believe what happened is maybe one of the rounds that were fired hit the fire sprinklers, set them off, flooded the room. It took a lot of time to get that process turned off, and then we discovered the explosive devices in the room. It took a lot of time to do that. We did not get to the portion where we were dealing with the victims and the bodies and trying to make the positive identification through fingerprints until the middle of the night. We've been working throughout the night on that, and we have been making notifications since then. What the sheriff plans to do is that slowly throughout the day we will release the names, hopefully of all 14 people today, as we are able to make notifications.
Anyone still in there?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
To the victims right away.
As of several hours ago, there were a few bodies left. We may have been able to remove those victims by now. I'm sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
Were you able? You talked about the delay in getting to the bodies to the sprinklers, etc. But were you able to go in right away and
Oh, absolutely. So the initial response, the officers went through the water and all that, identifying bodies, searching for suspects. All that was done. We had confirmed that those folks had lost their life, that they were dead, and then we discovered the IEDs, which caused the safety personnel to back out, deal with those in an effective way.
The holiday party, did the suspects have any conversation with the holiday goers?
Not that I've been told.
Did he say anything during the shooting?
Not that I've been told.
Have you been able to confirm, or have you been able to find out through local means and the FBI the list of all the local people here in the San Bernardino area that these people may have been in touch with over a period of, say, a week, 2 weeks prior to the shooting, or are you still reaching out to try to find those people?
That is still part of that broader, more complex investigation to see if there are other co-conspirators or people that may have been aware of something. And I'm just not quite prepared to give details on any of that just yet. So at the officer-involved shooting, we did indicate that there was a person that was detained out of that. That person was seen running away from the scene. What we have learned since then is that there were several police cars and undercover cars that pulled up that were engaged in that officer-involved shooting with the suspects. We found out later on that there were people that were in cars that abandoned their cars and ran the other direction when the gunfire started. I don't know if that person was one of those. We did ultimately determine that he was not involved in the incident. He is not a suspect. He's not a person of interest. He did happen to have a misdemeanor warrant. He was booked on that warrant. Sorry?
Where did you find the IED? In the conference room?
It was in the middle of the room on a table in a bag.
Were you able to ascertain whether or not it was the suspects or police who fired first at the shootout? And is it clear to you if these suspects had intent to die there?
I don't know if I can speak to their intent on that. It's my understanding they opened fire first. Rounds came out of the back of the car from the female that was in the back, firing through the back of the SUV at the police vehicles, and then the male suspect, who was the driver, got out and fired at officers from the street as well. I don't know who fired the first round.
What do we know about Mr. Farouk's wife?
I'm going to let the FBI. That's a part of the investigation that they're working on, and so they're doing up the history on that. And I just don't have enough info about her.
Did it stop on its own accord, or was it disabled?
I believe it stopped on its own accord to engage the officers.
What does this mean going forward? I know you can't talk about county buildings, but city buildings. I know this is, probably a flip. But what about security at city buildings?
So we stepped up security all across the city and all across the county yesterday at all of our city and county facilities. Schools went into lockdown today. It's my understanding that as of today, based upon the information that we have no credible threats, that a lot of those facilities are returning back to business as usual. But yesterday, everybody went into a lockdown.
We're not going to see people with rifles in front of City Hall ongoing.
No, I don't anticipate you will. We've also. What's that? I don't know. We'll try to get those answers later on. Actually, I'll let the sheriff address that from the county.
Last night, the County Board of Supervisors held a special meeting and decided to make the decision to shut down the non-essential county departments for today and tomorrow. not only to make sure that there weren't any threats that were still potentially developing yesterday, but as out of respect for the family members and fellow employees that were either victims or friends of the victims. And that's the decision the Board of Supervisors made. So the non-essential county operations have been shut down for today and tomorrow.
Chief, just to clarify, there's no suspects in connection with custody that you have currently.
Correct. It's my understanding we've contacted a number of them. They have been cooperative up to this point. I think there may be one or two that we're still looking for.
Were these suspects wearing cameras? Were they wearing GoPros?
They were not wearing. I've heard that rumor about the GoPros. I've asked our staff about it. Nobody's located GoPros. Nobody's located any evidence that they were wearing cameras of any sort.
Chief, do you know how many people were at the party?
I don't. We are going to try to get that by later this afternoon, though. Several of the family members have already been contacted, have been interviewed, and are cooperating. We're still looking for a couple of others. I'm sorry? I don't know anything about that.
Yes,
so.
The coroner's office is now having to handle 14 bodies at once. What impact is this having on the coroner's operation?
As you know, I'm responsible for the coroner's office as well. And our staff is on 12-hour shifts, and we've called folks in from their days off to assist with processing the scene and helping to identify the victims of this tragic event. We're in the process of making those identifications. The majority of them have been done, and a number of the notifications have been made, and we'll continue to update you as we get that information, and we can provide the names once the notifications of the next of kin have been made.
Will that be on the website?
We'll probably release it through a press release through our Public Affairs Division as we get that information.
Two more questions. We're going to wrap it up.
Does the wife have relatives in the United States?
Not that I've been told.
What country is she from?
Pakistan. Thank you very much, folks. We'll be in touch throughout the day.
Thank you, sir.
Spanish speaker right here.
All right, there was the daily, what has become a daily update since yesterday now. Chief Jared Bergwan again giving us some more information, some more details about what happened yesterday in this shooting in San Bernardino, California. Some of the interesting little details that came out of that was just the kind of firepower that these two individuals had. We knew that they had 2 assault-type weapons as well as 2 handguns. All of those were purchased legally. 2 of those were purchased by Syed Farouk, one of the now deceased suspects. I'll bring you up to date on some of these details in a minute, but right now I understand that we have Carter Evans at the scene, where the press conference took place. And Carter, you might be able to fill us in. I know that we're finding out a little bit more about these 2 suspects. Obviously, people are still not only stunned that this happened, but stunned that there was a woman involved. It's very unusual in these kinds of a mass shooting events. What else have you been able to glean about these 2 individuals?
You know, we learned a whole lot more today from the police and the FBI. We learned that these 2 individuals entered the building. The door was open. They opened fire, fired at least 65 shots inside that room where they killed 14 people and wounded 21 others. We also learned that they had 3 pipe bombs in that building attached to a remote control car, and there was some level of sophistication with that there. And to that note, when they took a look at the place, their residence where they lived, inside the garage, they found sophisticated bomb-making tools and 12 other pipe bombs, along with thousands of rounds of ammunition. They say they fired 75 shots at those 20 police officers during that confrontation just about a mile away from here in the SUV. And we are just learning so much more today about how this all went down and how much firepower was involved. But Don, what we still don't know is why these 2 individuals did this.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. Farouk has been described as a devout Muslim. In his neighborhood in Redlands, is that, as we've seen in some parts of the country and the world, when there is something that's terrorist, Islamic terrorist involved, which we're not saying this is yet, but that's what's been talked about primarily because, I hate to say it, but their names and the fact that it was such a mass shooting event, Have you been gleaning, have you been finding out anything about the neighborhood? Is there, for instance, an extremist mosque in the area or anything of that nature?
I haven't determined anything to that nature, at least in the neighborhood thus far, or the level or the number of Muslim residents in that neighborhood. But we do know that this was a fairly close family. The family members have already spoken about it. They're apparently cooperating with authorities. They indicated that they had no knowledge of this. But you got to imagine, you know, the police are saying that there was a lot of planning that clearly went into this, because they had to make these bombs, get these materials, get these guns, get all these rounds, come up with the plan. And, you know, they're trying to determine if anyone else knew anything about this. Another thing, Don, that they're trying to determine, we knew that they both had traveled internationally. His wife is from Pakistan, and he had traveled internationally and to Pakistan and to Saudi Arabia within the last year or so, and they haven't been able to rule out that there is some connection between that international travel and this massacre. So that's something that the FBI is looking into right now.
Yeah, they said that this guy Farouk, was not on the radar screen, in fact, is what the chief said. And again, these numbers are astounding, that there were 1,400 rounds left behind, and that's just the .223 caliber, which are used in those AR-15 type weapons. They had 200 9mm rounds, and that's just what was in the vehicle. They had many, many more that were in that house in Redlands, which, as they said, made you think that this wasn't just he got angry at this holiday party, stormed off, and came back to wreak his revenge, that there was a lot of planning. Has that stunned the community to have that kind of an operation happening right underneath their noses?
I think that that's something this community is very concerned about, and that leads to the question and hopefully eventually the answer of why they may have done this. I mean, it was a tremendous amount of firepower, a tremendous amount of planning that went into this, and that's certainly concerning to this community around here. Where do you go from there, though? You've got all this evidence. Well, they got to track it down. They got to track down where they got it from, interview the people they got it from. They've also got to look at all the digital evidence that they may have on computers, cell phones, other types of tablets and digital devices. Look at websites, their history, where they've been, to try and get an idea of what they were thinking here. And the big question, Don, is, you know, they had gone home. They were clearly loaded with some firepower in that vehicle they had. Where were they going?
Yeah.
Where were they planning to go? What were they going to do next? That's a big question, and I think that also concerns a lot of people in the community around here.
Completely understandable. The third suspect that was there was a lot of concern about yesterday when this was happening, that was seen running away. The officers did a very intensive sweep of that neighborhood. The chief said that he is not a suspect, not connected to this event. He had a warrant, an outstanding misdemeanor warrant. He was booked on that, but that he was not part of it. But and the chief, and as well as the Bowditch from the FBI, David Bowditch, said that there is no credible ongoing threat right now. But again, this community just had a massacre happen there. There has to be some kind of concern. If that can happen with these two individuals there, what else might be out there?
Right, so you've got no credible ongoing threat, but you also still don't know the motive here. And once they know the motive, once they determine at least or get an idea of why they may have done this, you know, that may change. You may find out that other people are involved. You may not. I'm not saying that that's the case right now, but that's certainly something that the FBI is looking into. And as is the case with all of these breaking and developing stories, you know, the facts and details are subject to change as the day goes on.
That's so true. Carter, I know you've covered California for a long time, even before you joined CBS News, so you're well aware of how strict the gun laws there are. But we spoke with one congressman earlier today who said he wasn't at all surprised that they were able to acquire these AR-15 type assault rifles. He said it's a porous border in this state. You can bring them in from anywhere.
Right, and we've confirmed that all of these weapons were purchased legally. Now, the chief said that the handguns were purchased by Farouk, and it appears the AR-15s were purchased by a friend and then legally transferred. All of these guns were all purchased in California. That's what we're uncovering here right now. So yeah, it is legal to have these weapons, at least as far as we know right now, unless any modifications have been done to them that we're unaware of.
Carter, what kind of sense are you getting from the community of trying to move on, or are they still just so stunned and so much in mourning right now that there is no moving on at this point?
I think everybody's still in shock, and it's because that big question is still looming. You know, was this simply workplace violence, a grudge that he held against people at work? You know, when you talk with his coworkers and you read their accounts of their interactions with him, it appears that there was no indication of that. We may find out from his employer earlier today what his situation was there, but as far as we know, he was still working in good standing.
All right, Carter Evans, thank you so much. I know we'll probably be checking in with you a little later as anything comes up. I appreciate you spending the time with us. For now, our coverage continues with a first-hand account from a witness who saw the attack unfold. What he says happened. We'll have that for you when we come back. As we've been saying, the investigation continues on the massacre in San Bernardino. I want to bring in on the phone now Pat Milton. She's the senior producer for the CBS Evening News investigative unit. She has been gathering information since this began yesterday. Pat, why don't you bring us up on the latest that you have on this?
Well, yes, the chief of the San Bernardino Police Department had a news conference and went over what they know so far. And he's saying that 75 rounds, rifle rounds, were found at the scene, and also that the suspects left behind 3 rigged together pipe bombs with a remote control device that apparently malfunctioned. In addition to that, they had over 1,600 more bullets with them when they were gunned down outside their SUV.
And what do we know specifically about the rifles and the handguns?
Well, our sources are telling us that the weapons were purchased in California. They were purchased legally. In addition to that, our sources are saying that 2 of the weapons were transferred legally from a friend.
I'm sorry, Pat. So there was also some information, I think, about the fact that Farouk had traveled to Saudi Arabia in 2014, and that's where he met Tashfeen Malik, who became his fiancée there, and he brought her back to the U.S., correct?
Yes, that's apparently. We also had information from another source that he had gone to Saudi Arabia for Hajj, which is a pilgrimage, Islamic pilgrimage.
What do we know about whether he was radicalized in some way or another? He was described as a devout Muslim. He went on his pilgrimage there. Have you been able to find out anything about his activities in the neighborhood, in the mosque, whether or not, you know, he had shown any kind of an interest in ISIS, anything of that nature?
Well, intelligence and law enforcement are trying to put all these pieces together, and some of them are theorizing that he was on the road to radicalization if possibly he had already arrived to radicalization. They're saying that clearly it appears that he targeted the people that he shot and killed and wounded. The theory is that if he did get mad that, maybe he had been planning this and he had a grudge and didn't care for the people, or there was some issues that he had prior to that holiday party. There's some reports that he stormed out in a huff, in an argument, and others said no, that he just merely disappeared. But as all law enforcement have been saying over the last day and a half now, that he was and his wife or fiance were well prepared. You don't just, have an argument and run home and get on tactical gear and go back with pipe bombs and ammunition that they were carrying and carry out a rampage just by being sparked by an argument. So they said that it was clear that this was planned and prepared, and the law enforcement is also bringing up that with the ammunition that they had found in the suspect's home, it was clear that a bloodbath was avoided.
Yeah.
That it was a terrible rampage at the facility, but they said it probably it could have very well been worse than it was.
No, it's true. And the law enforcement officer said that the chief today said that he was not on anyone's radar screen, which, and again, this has not been determined to be a terrorist attack. It's at this point being classified as a mass shooting. But you and I both know that here in New York City, they have stopped over 20 attacks, largely because of intel. They find out about these individuals who are making these plans, are acquiring these material. When you look at the thousands and thousands of rounds of very specific 223 bullets are very specific for that kind of a weaponry, and there was no intel on this, that's got to be incredibly disconcerting for law enforcement officers out there.
Well, and law enforcement and the intelligence community has been warning Americans of this, that there's people that are in basements and in their bedrooms and planning things, and they can't keep track of all of these people. There was always there was a big discussion after the Paris attacks that some of these terrorists or wannabe terrorists were going to dark apps, and where their encrypted messages could not be followed by the intelligence community or law enforcement. So that is a major issue. I think it's unclear now whether any of his communications were involved with terrorists or not. There's no indication at this point that there was any kind of a directed attack. But their FBI and other investigators are combing through computers and thumb drives and social media and text messages, trying to get some clue as to the whereabouts and who he was talking to and what this motive of this horrendous attack was. That's really the point, isn't it, of this investigation? There are people who are saying, well, if the two suspects are dead, why pour over all the material? We know what happened. But it's in case this is part of a larger conspiracy and that they had some compatriots who maybe were helping them or else had other plans as well. Well, that's very true. It's very valuable, and also you have a crime here. You have 14 people that are dead and numerous people that are wounded, and you've got to solve and find out what happened here. All right, Pat, I understand you might have some information on whether Farouk was looking at ISIS propaganda online? No, I don't. I'm not clear of any of that yet. We're still looking into it. All right. What are what's the meaning behind the fact that President Obama has given the lead in this investigation to the FBI rather than allowing local law enforcement handle it as just a murder scene? Well, I think, the early indications are that this person, may have been radicalized or may have been on the road to radicalization. So I think that the FBI is more equipped to zero in on that kind of investigation rather than the San Bernardino Police Department. They appear to have done a fabulous job. The police chief was saying that their department was anything short of heroic. But the FBI brings to bear a lot of resources and a lot of expertise and a lot of manpower that I think is crucial and valuable in this investigation.
Sure. Pat, I just want to make sure that we're reporting something accurately here, because there's a banner up on our screen right now that says the suspects watched ISIS propaganda online. That's not coming from your investigative unit.
I'm not clear that it's coming from the investigative unit. I'm not sure whether other members of my investigative unit had reported that out.
Okay, we're going to try to nail that down before we talk more about it.
I mean,
Pat
it's
Milton,
very clear that it could be correct. I'm just not up
you're
to
just
speed
working on
as to
another
what-
angle. Okay, I'm being told in my ear that there's another member of our investigative unit that did nail that down, that the suspects did watch ISIS propaganda online. This is, of course, a very fluid investigation, both for law enforcement as well as for us. The difference there is that we work really hard to get it right. We can't just go with one source on that, so we're very careful about that. Pat Milton, thank you so much. He's with our investigative unit for CBS Evening News.
Thank you very much.
Try to relax, everyone. Try to relax. I'll take a bullet before you do. That's for damn sure. Just be cool, okay? Both elevators. Wait till they both get here. Don't let them stack like that. Get them in the hall. We'll be what's safe.
Go, go, go.
We're all done, Lilo. I'll just wait on them. Keep going. Get away from that door. Come on in.
I'll take a bullet before you do. That from a law enforcement officer to the people who were evacuating that center after the massacre happened. A social worker at the Inland Regional Medical Center was able to record video of the moments following that shooting. He captured video of the aftermath of the rampage on his cell phone. He described what he saw to CBS This Morning's co-host Nora O'Donnell earlier today.
I was in building 2, third floor in the regional center, which is right next to where the shooting was occurring in auditorium A and B. I was in one of my colleagues' offices overlooking through the window.
How did you know that a shooting had occurred?
At the time, I was in my office doing paperwork, listening to music, and I got a text from a colleague stating there was an active shooter. At that time, I thought it was just maybe somebody walking around the grounds with a gun or just maybe something happening. So either way, I got up out of my desk, opened my door, went in the hallway, and I saw my colleagues running around, screaming, crying, frantic. So I actually took into effect that it may be something more serious than what it is.
They said we need to get into lockdown.
Yes, we're being advised to go into a conference room, barricade ourselves with chairs and tables, lay down on the ground, make sure everything's okay. At that time, I heard there was 2 bodies down, but I instinctually, me being me, had to see what was happening. So I took my own advice to go look out a window to see what I can see.
In fact, you took out your iPhone.
Yes, I did.
And you had a bird's eye view of the entrance and the exit that the shooters went in.
Correct. I took out my phone instinctually and started recording what I could for just effect to see everything so I can have proof if anything comes to or anything with the police or if anything else happens.
We're looking at that video right now. What did you see first?
At first, what I saw was the SWAT team coming into the back door, about 5 or 6, storming into A and B, looking for active shooter, as well to the west side of the building. There was police standing at the door going in for an active shooter. As well in the back, there was a gentleman deceased on the bench, I assumed, as well a female about 10 to 15 feet away, laying in a pool of blood, deceased as well.
You think they were trying to flee and then were shot when they were trying to flee?
Correct. The female, I assume, due to her positioning and what she was facing with her back to the building, she was fleeing. The gentleman, I assume that he was having a smoke break or just enjoying a bench, and he was shot either on the exit or the entrance of the assailants.
The response from the police was very quick.
Very quick, very powerful. SWAT, San Bernardino PD, CHP, sheriff, pretty much you name it was there within minutes as well to do everything they could to protect us as well to try to apprehend the active shooter.
Did you see any of the shooters?
No, unfortunately. My office was on the north side of the building and the shooting was on the south side. By the time I got there, it was about 15 minutes after the shooting, and that's when the police department and everybody were pulling body after body out of auditorium A and B.
I think that's one of the most disturbing things about your video, to see them bringing some of the bodies out. How were they doing that?
They were grabbing it as much as they could, arms, feet. They had them in chairs, just trying to get them out of harm's way. And trying to get them just out to clear, seeing if they're critical and or deceased, and just trying to clear out as much as they could.
Get everybody the medical help they needed immediately.
Correct.
When did you realize how grave this situation was?
It was probably about the sixth body coming out, just seeing the effect of it all. At first I saw the two bodies, I'm like, okay, it's two bodies, not saying it's not bad, but it's two bodies, it may not be that bad. And then third body, fourth body, fifth body. By the 12th body, I stopped counting.
You saw 12 bodies?
At least 12, including the two there. I think I counted up to 13 when I was finally seen from the ground level by the police that acquired their weapons at me with the reflection. And at that time, I thought it was a good time to stop recording and get to safety.
You realized that it was, that this is still... Did you think that there might still be an active shooter on the grounds?
No, honestly, with the training I've been going through with the San Bernardino City School District, with the task force I went, and just common sense, realistically, I don't think anybody would stay there on grounds. I thought within minutes.
You've been through training already from San Bernardino for an active shooter situation?
Correct. I'm in with a task force with the San Bernardino City School District to work as this. We started after Sandy Hook a few years ago. We started a program here in San Bernardino City. As well, Regional Center has with the SWAT team of San Bernardino City Police. We're doing active shooting. We actually just had a training, which is coincidental, for active shooting.
When was the training that you had for an active shooter?
I believe it was last week, but I know we have another one coming up in February.
So you had just been through an active shooter training.
Correct.
That had been put in place after Newtown and Sandy Hook.
Correct. And we have the city school district, we have an active shooter where different teams come together, SWAT and everybody, FBI, Homeland Security, with the school district that I'm a part of here in San Bernardino.
When you hear that this is now the worst mass shooting since Sandy Hook, what do you think?
I learned that last night watching 3-4 hours. I didn't watch news until last night, and it was just intense knowing that I actually was part of it, and the part of that I had, whatever it may be, to record what I did. It's intense. You don't realize what it is until you get out of the situation.
What lessons will you take from this?
So many. Don't take anything for granted. I mean, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. Sorry. So I thought about her and then everything else I could, and just realized that, you know, when you're going into work, it may be your last time coming in, and thought about a lot of different things.
You thought about your daughter?
Yeah.
I'm glad you're okay.
Thank you.
Timmy Hilliard, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As the search for a motive continues, law enforcement will have their hands full. Coming up, where the investigation goes from here. This is CBSN. We know the fate of the couple directly involved in Wednesday's attack, but what's next for investigators? CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman joined Anne-Marie Green and Meg Oliver earlier to discuss what the FBI will be looking for.
I think what we have to do is look to what happened in the Boston Marathon bombing and the Tsarnaev brothers. It was not as simple when the prosecution, the FBI, the local police went forward in their investigation to say, well, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, the elder, he's dead. Let's just concentrate on Johar the younger. They didn't do that, and they're not going to do that here. You are going to look at relatives. You are going to look at friends. You are going to do what police should always do, what the FBI should always do, which is go through every piece of evidence that could lead you to the potentiality of other people, not only who may have helped, and therefore that you get a conspiracy theory, but you also are looking for the potential of prevention. Because when you hear about this garage, when you hear about this IED factory, it does certainly appear, without having to think very much about it, that there was the possibility of planning of other acts here. So where do we go? We look at the computers. We look at their accounts on social media. But also we're looking at their cell phones. We want to see every contact that they have had. Now, you understand, of course, what will raise its ugly head as a result of this. People will say our civil liberties are being trampled. You are coming to us solely because we are of Muslim descent and we happen to know these people. Well, we found out in the Boston Marathon bombing that you had Johar Tsarnaev behaving as if he were the American boy, looked like he had the good life, just like this suspect who is now deceased, and he had friends. His friends moved the backpack, they moved materials, they also had statements that came to them. This is the beginning of an investigation, not the end.
Let's talk about the suspect's mother. She
Yes.
was left with the baby. We're hearing reports that they all lived together in that Redlands home. As you mentioned, in the garage, authorities found what looks like an IED factory. When we talked to the former FBI profiler, she said one thing that they look for is leakage. And did people know of things?
Of course.
So could that suspect's mother potentially be charged?
She could potentially be charged if, in fact, they can really show that she knew